the time tunnel. Face the incredible dangers of the past, or the unknown secrets of the future.
In this video, I'll compare and contrast the reactions of the Catholic Church in the United States to the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic to what is occurring now with the coronavirus. In the fall of 1918, the number of fatalities from the Spanish flu skyrocketed. It peaked in the United States in October, when 195,000 people died in that single month. According to this article from the Catholic Union and Times from October 23rd of 1918, to print just the names of the Catholics who died in just Buffalo would take up columns of the newspaper. During October, therefore, quarantine efforts were implemented throughout the United States. In contrast to the current coronavirus initiatives, where state governments are taking the lead in creating quarantines, in 1918 it was done at the local level by municipalities. This resolution by the Board of Health for Grass Valley, California was typical. It resolved that schools, movie theaters, and public libraries be closed. It also asked churches and lodges not to hold services or meetings, and all dances would be postponed. However, saloons, cigar stands, ice cream parlors, and pool halls would remain open, but they were required to close at 5 p.m. The Diocese of Newark cooperated with its Board of Health, calling on churches to discontinue services until the spread of influenza was abated. However, priests in the diocese were not willing to do so until they first checked with Bishop O'Connor as to whether they should do so. In St. Louis, masses were also prohibited. Archbishop John J. Glennon agreed to comply. However, he ordered that churches remain open so that Catholics could visit the Blessed Sacrament. So in 1918, Catholic bishops observed the letter of quarantines when ordered to do so by local authorities. In contrast, this year, bishops in Chicago and Seattle and other places ordered that their churches be closed, even before any quarantines or demands were put in place by authorities. In 1918, the church saw its duty as one of saving souls. Its mission was supernatural. In 2020, the Novus Ordo Church is more occupied with trying to save lives more than trying to save souls. Its mission is worldly. It should be noted that in 1918, some municipalities, such as the one in Chicago and Brooklyn, took a more moderate approach. They limited services to 45 minutes. This article from the Brooklyn Tablet said that masses were curtailed. There were no more high masses, just low masses. The authorities acted cautiously, sanely, and they were afraid to spread undue alarm. In cemeteries, there were delays of unannounced burials so that large groups wouldn't show up for funerals. Priests and nuns were also dying. So in 1918, the authorities didn't want to spread undue alarm. The same thing could hardly be said in 2020. The authorities are leading the charge in spreading panic. In Buffalo, New York, however, masses were outright prohibited. Father James F. McGloin said that it was the first time in the history of the Buffalo Diocese that Sunday masses were not being held in Catholic churches. He said, "My personal recollection goes back 40 years. And I do not recall ever having heard that Catholic churches here were closed on Sunday before this." In the stories that had been printed of the cholera and smallpox epidemics in Buffalo 2 generations earlier, there was never a request for church services to be forbidden by city authorities. In those days, it was common to call a public day of prayer to God to avert the ravages of pestilence. Masses were also banned by the authorities in Leavenworth, Kansas. The ban on closing moving picture shows in churches in the same way was deplored by Bishop Lillis of the Leavenworth Diocese, who objected to the churches being classed with moving picture shows and theaters during the epidemic. There was a pall over the city, and with the churches closed and the people denied opportunity of assisting at divine worship, there was much depression of the spirit. Bishop Lillis cited Chicago as one of the largest cities in the world, but it hadn't closed its churches. In an open letter to the press, Father Michael Riordan of Washington, D.C. deplored the closing of the churches. In the opinion of many medical men, the closing of our churches and schools is without scientific warrant, he said. The most deplorable feature of the order is its moral effect. It ignores the spiritual character and work of the church and places it on the same level of unimportance as the theater and dance hall. The divine command delivered on Mount Sinai to keep holy the Sabbath may now be dispensed with, like a visit to the movies. To the authorities, religion is a thing apart, while in reality, we Christians regard it as our whole existence. Monsignor C.F. Thomas, who like Father Riordan, was also from Washington, D.C. He protested against the prohibition of divine services in the District of Columbia. He called for a universal protest against the prohibition of divine services. He agreed that the times were critical. For instance, the pandemic of influenza was raging. But in contrast to 2020, World War I was raging during the Spanish flu epidemic. The fate of the world's democracy was in the balance. So, though worldly men might have seen those as reasons for the prohibition against masses, all these factors actually made it even more urgent to seek God's protection. Despite that need, Catholics were prevented from publicly assembling to implore God's aid and guidance. Father Thomas asked whether faith in the supernatural had vanished. He asked that the civil authorities make it possible to show the reverence and confidence in God. He implored that the bans be raised, and with due precaution allow public supplication to the divine being who governs all. In December of 1918, the Catholic Advance commented that though Kansas law states that in a case of serious epidemic, the Board of Health may close schools, theaters, etc., and in extreme cases, they could also close churches. In the flu epidemic, religion and religious worship were classified as non-essential or less essential than the saloon, the department store, or the 5-cent store. The Catholic Advance sardonically mused that perhaps churches might have been permitted to remain open if a bar or a bargain counter had been put up inside them. Los Angeles closed its churches, and fines were levied against churches that ignored the prohibition. The case was heard by Judge White in December of 1918, who said, "There seems to be some merit in the contention of the defendant's counsel that the Los Angeles City Council had apparently picked out those who are bent upon entertainment or worshiping their Creator as being the persons most liable to spread influenza. And after declaring, as a legislative body, that such assemblies are unlawful, attempts to delegate to the Health Commissioner of Los Angeles the privilege of saying what other congregations of people might cause influenza to spread. Can they single out churches and theaters and prohibit assemblies of people in them, but at the same time permit other people who may not care to go to church or to a theater, but would care, for instance, to meet in a weekend party in their home? Can they permit that assembly to congregate and deny people the right to congregate in churches? If they deny the right of 20 people to assemble at a church, surely they must deny the right of 20 people to meet in a department store, a bank, or in a home. So in summary, in 1918, great men ran the church. Like the many, many generations before them, they knew that the best course of action when faced with a plague was to gather their congregations and to pray together to God. Even if some of the congregation was lost to the plague, those people would be better prepared to meet their Maker. In contrast to the great and strong priests and bishops of 1918, nowadays we have weak, silly, and possibly stupid men running the Novus Ordo Church. When they see a temporal danger, instead of facing it, they prefer to run away and hide from it. They act no differently than any corporation or business. Well, thank you for watching this installment. I'll be back again in about a week with another one. But in the meantime, please pray for the church.
I wanna jump, but I'm afraid I'll